Yeah, now that's a profound shift just in this conversation from the idea of, oh yeah, let's give a voice, to actually recognizing we need to give power, that we need to give opportunities, that we need to be willing to give resources. We need to be really looking differently at how we share the balance of power. And this is a shift, and you can even see it in this conversation. Dave, didn't you? Okay, good. Who else? Yes.
I had a question for the panelists and anyone else listening. One of the flags that's come up for me in hearing comments is, what type of capacity building do we actually need to do within these systems to be able to take this information and use it meaningfully in the decision-making processes that are happening? So I'm hearing a lot about, we want to engage, we want feedback, we want citizens, how do we absorb? I think you called it absorbing this new citizenship engagement. And so what does that mean in terms of like psychological values, culture, cultural norms, and creating collective movements like across cultures? I'm just wondering, like, if the panelists or anyone in the room has any ideas or what they're thinking type of capacity building actually needs to happen in these systems. You know, I always think, like, we always talk about what capacity building we need to do with the youth, and we never seem to be talking about what capacity building we need to be doing with adults who are managing these systems. So, when the UN makes these statements that these are our goals, so what capacity building is happening within the UN to be able to take that feedback?
Okay, very good. Sorry, I know you want to speak to it. Maybe, yeah. Did you want to?
Sure.
So
I have a few recommendations around that, and I'm going to get a little bit geeky about it. First off, I think when we're trying to increase the capacity for citizens to effectively engage, which I think is what you're saying is like, how do we get to that point where they have the tools for effective engagement? Right?
I'm actually interested in how the system is going to take that information and then use it in a really genuine and meaningful way to implement change versus tokenizing it.
Yeah, I think that there's a couple things. Like, they have to start with a plan in place before they even begin kind of whatever kind of engagement they're trying to do, or trying to get information from citizens to use. They have to figure out who's going to manage this, who's going to be responsible for this, who's going to communicate back results. There was a government who came to me for advice, well, anonymous, but they had created a blog and put up all of these articles about a very contentious process where they were going to change a resource law. And it had a tremendous amount of stakeholders. And so they allowed people to comment, but they deleted any comment that mentioned any minister. And that's a part of their official process. But they don't tell people that. And then the ministers just wanted data back. They just wanted numbers, like what was the breakdown of pro and cons on this particular point in the piece of legislation. But all they had was qualitative information. They had stories. They had people's life's work documented in reference to the resource. And the public servants didn't know how to take thousands of stories and turn it into data that the ministers wanted. And so my suggestion to them was, okay, you have to find individuals who seem to be speaking for the greatest majority of folks in your comment threads. Maybe have them put together a paper saying, here's what we're hearing, here's where the perspective is coming from, and to do some public events that were focused and bring people into a place. They also weren't able to take that video from those public events and post it online. So I was like, why don't you invite a public journalism group in to take video of it and post it online for you? So they had to use all of these processes to sort of get what the ministers needed to make a decision, but also prove to the citizens that they had genuinely been listening. And this was a radical departure from their normal process. So I think internal in government, they have to think really critically about how we're going to listen and make sure that people know that they're heard. A couple of exciting examples of how governments have actually heard their citizens and implemented programs is a lot of it has come out of participatory budgeting out of places like World Bank, where this brilliant guy, if you're on Twitter, follow Participatory. His name is Tiago Paxoto. He's from Brazil. He's brilliant, and if you ever get the chance to hang out with him, do, because it's just fun. But they've implemented participatory budgeting processes where the government breaks off a portion of budget and says to people, we want your ideas on projects that you want to see implemented in your community. And then the ideas are posted, they're voted on, it's a transparent voting process, and then the government hits the ground running in terms of implementing those programs, and the rates of public approval for that government skyrocket. Their re-election rates skyrocket because you made citizens a part of the process, soup to nuts, and you actually did it. And so I think as these new processes are developed, citizens will have to, governments will have to prove that they are worthy of citizens' trust in communicating with them and implementing what's actually being said to them. And that's not an easy task.
So you're saying the transparency, right? Let them see the process. So the accountability, integrity, transparency are part of how to respond, to be able to make sure that people are actually seeing them challenged with the issue about how we're going to respond to all this. In fact, and then Thomas Friedman wrote this article about popularism, the challenges of just trying to be a leader and responding to all the tweets. That's the right way to set policy isn't necessarily always the case. So, did you want to speak to this? I mean, because I think it's really the right question. Says, okay, you guys want to respond now. What does that look like?
Yeah, from what we see, there is a systemic issue here, and we are looking at it from the perspective of developing countries where the landscape is actually very different. And there is an environment that is missing that needs to be put in place. So there is a policy framework that needs to be put in place to allow this to happen. It's not the case necessarily over there. In many cases, you don't have freedom of information laws, for example. There's no mechanism for the citizens to engage that constructively with the government, just because it's not there in the law, it's not codified. So there's no obligation for the government's institutions to respond. And this work has to happen at the policy level to create these environments for the communication, in which the communication can flourish. And that is something that we are engaging in the United Nations UNP. A lot of the work that we're doing is actually on developing these policies on freedom of information, access to information. That is very important. And once you have that, then you have you go to the next stage, which Sarah is talking about, which is, how do you effectively engage with them? What are the tools that you can put in place for this to happen? And what are the kind of capacity of the government itself in using those tools? It's something that is fairly new to them most of the time, because even within their own administrations, it's not in place. They don't have the use of ICT tools to manage the administrative processes themselves is not in place. That does not exist. So that capacity has to be implemented. Before we talk about using ICT to talk to people, we have to use it to improve our government itself. That's not there. So the culture is sometimes not there. So that capacity also needs to be built. Development of the capacity of the governments themselves to use ICT tools. E-governance. E-governance is not only participation, but it's also public administration before. And that's important.